So this is a brown bag, and I asked Angie to make a point that everybody should feel free in these brown bags to bring their lunch in. And I know only a few people do, and maybe some people feel kind of weird about it. You should bring your lunch in, right? I'm going to keep this pretty simple, and I just want to review the excavations of Emerald, going back before when we started with some grant-funded work out there in 2012, a little bit, but then really making one simple point. This is not an ordinary site. It's not an ordinary residential site. It's probably as close to a pure religious site as I think you could probably get, and I'll make that point through showing you some of the buildings that we excavated and some of the special deposits out there. First, if you know nothing about the Emerald site, what I just said about it being exceptional starts with its position. Right? It's in the middle of what would have been in 1000 AD or so, kind of nowhere, in the middle of a prairie, which would have reached over and kind of continued that direction, broken up by some trees, on a hilltop away from any kind of permanent body of water, except for the water running out of the sides from underneath of this particular hill, which is a large interlobate glacial moraine, as are some of the other hills, most of the other hills in this area, which have a special feature of having perched water tables in the inside, such that when they catch rainwater, they absorb it until it hits this perched water table, and then it runs out the side of the ridge, which is clearly what is happening here. In fact, the farmers complain about this all the time. This is why they did a lot of damage to the site that I'll show you in a sec. Oh, and lastly, of course, it's been talked about for years. I mean, this is the first site reported in St. Clair County. The initial accounts by John Francis Snyder talk about an Indian road that went from Cahokia to it, probably somewhere along that yellow line is, which of course is Jacob's research. Part of Jacob's dissertation was working on that road in addition to working on other aspects of the site. And there's Jacob working with Tim Larson of the Geological Survey off to the left, using, what was this technique, Jacob?
It was resistive.
Just a special kind of transect-based resistivity, yeah. And actually finding the road, and Jacob later realizing that the road had been taken over by a wagon trail in the early 1800s, and so there are wagon ruts which show up really nicely on old aerials. Theodore Lewis of the Northwestern Survey fortunately visited this site. This is one of the most southerly sites he visits, along with Cahokia, and talks about 12 mounds, which was really useful when we finally got LiDAR and you can look for 12 mounds and pretty much pick out 11 of those 12. Also fortunately, one of those mounds, two of them actually, this circular one in the front and then the big one back behind the old historic house, were drawn in the 1880s, such that we can say without a doubt that what the description describes, Theodore Lewis, as circular flat-top mounds, is in fact what other people also saw. And those circular flat-top mounds are like probably 10 or 11 of the 12, and are a part of this religious character of this site. By the 60s, a few things happened. The old house that you still see here was about to be torn down, and the owner, who was the grandfather? It was the father of Jeff Christ. Our ISAS, the large heavy equipment operator, was hired to start taking away this mound. The owner also, before he built a new house, clearly, on LiDAR you can see, clearly bulldozed part of the site. It's serious damage. At which point that the large amount of stuff was saved by being purchased and then becoming state property. Forgot. So I also mentioned that there was a little bit of archaeology at the State Museum. Howard Winters and Stuart Striever kind of were there to watch two of these mounds go away. And then Bob Hall, again, this is Jacob's dissertation work. Bob Hall excavated that T-trench that you see on top of that mound, documented somewhat documented archaeological features. Let's leave it there. Tom Emerson convinced me somehow to an opportunity to profile this mound in the early 90s, which we did over a couple of seasons. I fell off of a wooden ladder at one point, and I blame that on Tom. But it was a really interesting profile for a couple of reasons. Clearly lots of special deposits, but also like no artifacts. Another characteristic feature of this site that makes it like non-domestic is really light scatter of artifacts, and only in some features do you find concentrations of human activity. ISAS, then ITARP, also did a couple of seasons of salvage work, generally associated with the fact that one of the farmers, landowners, wanted to terrace and proceeded to terrace part of this site. This is the second episode that I keep referring to Jacob's dissertation. This is also something that Jacob analyzed, and you want to see a really fine dissertation, Jacob's account. But this is among other things, the weird, strange attributes of this upland hilltop site is that it's also a buried stratified site. And here's pure cultural deposits, mostly construction fill, under and part of the lower part of one of those mounds with the Tamira standing in front of. Okay, so at this point in the 2000s, I ended up working, and ISAS also worked at the Pfeffer site, which is 3 miles away. Nearby, another similar situation where we found some things that help us figure out emerald. Pfeffer has a light distribution of buildings, which you can see here are kind of scattered out pretty widely. Part of the site was destroyed by the landowner. ISAS crews work there. This is the Illinois Field School. In some ways, it turns out that what we saw at Pfeffer looked a lot like than what we found later at Emerald, which is including like plasters, yellow and in this case black, lenses at the bottom, which looked to have been laid down wet as plaster by people. That's a pit. You also see these in buildings. So this particular building is, earlier we would have called this a temple. We've sort of shifted terminology. We're calling these shrine houses now. It's sort of unclear. They're not really domestic houses, but maybe they're like ancestral kind of houses where people might go to certain rituals, right, inside. The distinctive attribute of these that we first recognized, actually at Halliday, but they're also here and they're also at Grossman, are that a yellow plaster, which if you look carefully enough, you can sort of see inside the post molds, it's a lighter color of yellow. And then once you get outside the post molds, you're into the standard subsoil, more of a yellowish brown, right? This plaster and these generally defines a shrine house, as does the fact they have hearths. They'll have little pits in the corners or along the walls. The plaster will go down into the post holes. They actually dug the post holes, got the floor ready, plastered everything, it looks like. And then these big basins, and they're usually deep, up to a meter, kind of like your traditional terminal labeled house in this region, would be the scene of other special burning and washing events, like some kind of ritual deposits associated with fire and water. Water. And that's another distinctive thing about Emerald when we get back to it. This is still Pfeffer, is the prevalence of water laminated silts filling up at least portions of these shrine house basins. And here what you're looking at is a complicated series of a couple of floors separated by mound fill, almost like. Then some water deposits, then some more packed fill, it looks like mound fill, or some other enriched fills. More water, more fill, more water, more fill. This kind of alternation is really common at Emerald. Okay, now we go back to Emerald. So, thank God that Tom had LiDAR first flown at Emerald in 2010. I believe that's right, 2010. And this is what its site looked like in 2010. And I didn't bother trying to highlight the mounds in these, but you can kind of see where they were. There's like 3 here, 3 here, a couple there, maybe another one there. And then we know historically that the 2 that Winters and Strieber saw were over here. And there's even some contours suggestive of where that mound was. Susan put some units into this, and actually you can still see the mound, the base of it still there. Here's what it looked like the next year. So what happened was the farmer had already done some preliminary terracing, and then LIDAR was flown, and then the very next year he come back and done serious terracing, and actually kind of erased a couple of those mounds that are hidden and partially bulldozed by some of those terraces. Then we had LIDAR flown again. So hadn't that LIDAR existed in 2010, we would not have a very good map of the Emerald site. Now looking at this LIDAR, you might also, especially this one, see that the site may look a little bit oddly shaped. And we think now, based on some of the excavations that I'll show you, that yeah, this has been contoured, especially this end. It's more squared looking. And it looks like these mounds, I believe, Jacob, which was the one that had that big cut I showed? Was it this one, I think? Or maybe it was that one.
One of the two, actually.
Looks like that area was filled first, kind of pushed out, and then the mounds were put on top of this filled area out in here. And we also have evidence over here of filling as a way of kind of reshaping this ridge somewhere around 1050. Okay. So more interpreted a bit more with mounds and rows, looked kind of like this. This is ISAS LIDAR with some mounds interpreted where we think they probably were. Right? 12. Only one we don't really know about number 8. And then an artist's view, same kind of view, using that LIDAR to imagine what the site would have looked like. This is for Archaeology magazine. And in fact, he didn't want to put too many buildings out there, and later you'll see there's another image where we actually tried to guesstimate what it would have looked like with buildings. Okay, so based on that preliminary work, and after the farmer terraced in 2011, Charlie Whitty was working with him. I was talking to him about trying to do more out there, and we managed to get funding from the Templeton Foundation, which starts in this next phase of 2012 to 2016 excavations, and also this regional survey or locality survey. I can't tell you how much acreage this is, but at least the area, I think it's green. Is that green? We surveyed everything in green, and we surveyed more of the area that says access granted, that shows in this slide. But we surveyed a big chunk of the area around this Emerald site, showing us what? Basically shows us that if you get beyond 3 kilometers, there aren't many people. But there are a lot of people within 2 to 2.5 kilometers, all gathering around the main ridge itself. And since then, last year we tested 4 or 5 of these little sites in this 2 to 2.5 kilometer range, and they all are turning out to be single house field houses. They're temporary residences, not long-term farmsteads. Again, this kind of idea that it's a place where people go for a specific purpose, a religious purpose. They don't stay long. They maybe grow some crops to feed the event, and they go home. And how we know that they're there, we'll skip that one. Also, as part of this survey, we located some other likely mounds that all seem to be on the same axis as the site itself. There's the one that Bob Hall reported years ago that the big mound is facing. There's another one here, and another one right at the edge of Lebanon, which is still in a guy's yard. That's probably a mound. Of course, he doesn't want us to test it. And then lastly, there's a big natural, the blue mound off in the distance, seemingly on this alignment. Right? Okay. Go to the middle of those alignments. The site's big. It's bigger than I anticipated. The green line is the limit of material scatter. Some of that scatter being a result of the fact that the farmer is terraced, is going to push some of that material out. Certainly, we know there are buildings all in the red line, and after we collected this past year, we were finding features, because the guy ditched this last year, finding features all the way down to about here. So it's a big, big site that's like not quite a square mile. So over the course of 2012 and 2016, we dug a series of blocks. There's actually one more that's not on the slide that we have out here now. Pretty big excavation areas, EB 1 through whatever, 7. Let me show you, I think, brief what we found, and then I'll focus in on a few of these and give you a better flavor for what was in there. So, a lot of buildings, a lot of superimposed buildings. The only buildings that we think probably stood for any significant amount of time are the ones that show up here with yellow floors. Right? Those are those shrine houses you see over there, the shrine houses, the deeper ones. In fact, we totaled it all up, just in the excavation area, that we have 140 buildings, which is a lot. And if you know much about Cahokian archaeology and Tom's archaeology of power, you will also recognize that what the kinds of houses we're finding are all the kinds of classic Cahokian political religious buildings. So T-shaped buildings, L-shaped buildings, council houses, circular sweat lodges and rotundas, and then these yellow floored shrine houses are really prominent. And the other category, other rectangular, look to be mostly temporary, empty wall trench buildings like this for people to stay in for whenever it is that they're at this emerald site. Which we were calculating these and thinking, for reasons that I'll mention in a second, that these aren't all. These buildings are being built in pulses, it looks like. And so there might be a great pulse where they build this many structures. 400 to 1,600 at any one time. And then in the interim, maybe there's not many buildings out there. They may be deconstructing these after they're done. Then they'll go back and there's another pulse. So a pulse would look like this. And that's, again, kind of accounting for the fact that they're not all standing at once. This is a pretty good estimate, I think, of what the emerald site will look like. It's some pulse between 1,000 and early 1100s. When you excavate it, it's like as complicated as excavating at Cahokia, with just palimpsest of wall trenches everywhere. And then compounded by something we didn't really appreciate we were going to run into when we first really kind of came down on these big blocks in 2013, 2014, construction fill. So it looks like kind of like big chunks of Cahokia or East St. Louis where they kind of go in and they raise the area and put buildings on top. That's what they did here. So that in the southern part of this slide, you're only seeing the top layer of buildings. There's like more buildings beneath this that we didn't open up. Partly because we weren't sure at the time what we were dealing with. Another thing that we started to discover here that I think I have on the next slide, there's that same block here. This is higher in the slope. This is going down slope. We realized in geophysics, and we did more than this, and in excavation blocks, that all the circular buildings, these sweat lodges, these rotundas, are on top. And when you go down slope, we run out of circular buildings. We don't see them in geophysics, we don't see them in excavation. So like the buildings are segregated at this site, which is why we end up calling it like an acropolis. It's like a built-up hill that's where there's special religious buildings of a certain kind on top and then other sorts on the sides. There are rectangular ones on top too, but no circular ones on the side. That's it. That's my interpretation of what I thought I saw when I was looking at these. I already mentioned that lots of superimposed buildings, but if you look at these closely, they're just really empty shells. We had almost none of these wall trench buildings had basins, and almost none of them had artifacts. Even in the wall trenches, there's hardly a piece of charcoal in there, as Jacob can attest. Some of them are really clear, some of them aren't so clear. I think I have a shot of, here's one, you can almost see by looking at it, there's not much enrichment in the fills of this building, and the wall trenches, they're pretty much sterile. which makes it really tough to excavate. And especially if they're built on construction fill. So it's like fill on fill, all of which is sterile, and you're trying to figure your way through it. Except for the shrine houses. Now, so you get a sense for that, yeah, these are a little deeper, and there's more going on inside. It's the only place we have pits. I know there's some outside on the older ISAS excavations that Jacob analyzed. Maybe we had 1 or 2 pits in that whole mess of excavation blocks outside of buildings. So they're not storing food here in pits long term. So let me just show you 3 or 4 shrine house photos. This is a drone shot. And it's kind of washed out on this. But maybe you can see that in here, you see this slightly yellowish kind of plastered floor, and you get outside of it, we kind of scrape it away on that edge. You get into your subsoil colors, right? Here's another one. This one maybe is a little clearer. You can see in the northern edge there, you can see where the yellow stops, just right outside the post molds. These plasters are typically a few millimeters to a centimeter or 2 thick. Here's another one. Again, you can kind of see maybe down here best. The yellow floor, and then you're outside of it, right at the edge of the basin as we're pushing it out. You can also see something else in here that we're finding on almost all of these interesting shrine floors, is they don't leave too many artifacts, but one of the last things that they seem to do before this is all shut down and it washes shut is they burn some large piece of fabric or hide or something like that on the floor. And it's proven really difficult, and we actually got some micromorphology out of this that Jeannie mentioned in that first brown bag we had, that makes it look like it could be like multiple layers of different material, fabric and hide, like a bundle that's unrolled on the floor or something like that. But they're almost always in the middle, and they're usually pretty big. And because I know I had to have some slide to convince Tom Emerson that these are really yellow plastered floors. This one probably isn't going to do it still, but here's a case, and these yellow plastered floors are often replastered, so you get like multiple yellow plasters. In this case, this is a floor here that had a hearth on it that actually they came through later, and this is the second floor, this yellow, they plastered over this hearth. So we started taking this yellow plaster off and realized, oh, there's another floor down here. And it had a hearth on it, so had we scraped this more, this hearth would have continued right into a regular circular hearth. See, Tom, they're real. Occasionally there's an artifact on the floor. It's like the departing act on one of these buildings. But as commonly as you see those big burn patches or as you see yellow floors, you also see that they seemingly very intentionally, or maybe because they're not around, allow these deeper shrine house basins to wash shut with water. You kind of see the swirling silt that's going down into one here that we sectioned. And then we found in 3 of these cases footprints. So this is going to work. So if you look, maybe you can see it. Here's the heel, right? And then here's the broad part of the foot. And then the toes are kind of smeared down into this fill. Somebody, a fairly small-footed person, stepped into this around, 1050 AD. It's sunk. So you could trace this footprint like partway up in the basin fill, which is kind of cool. Like I said, we found them in 3 instances of footprints in buildings like this, which you'd expect, actually. It's a big muddy hole that's filling in with water, and there are some people around, not many apparently, but enough that there occasionally somebody steps into this building. All right, so kind of establish this category of a shrine house, which basically is, if you look back at the BPD mortar site, those 2 single post buildings that Tom reports in there, those are the slightly later versions of what I'm talking about here as shrine houses, these things. A lot of these other ones are these temporary shells, the wall trench buildings that look to be short term. This particular block is where we also found evidence of buried houses, under stratified construction fill. In fact, this particular block in 2014, we opened it, we could not find any sterile soil, and initially we were like, what is going on here? Until we finally put this trench, we cut a trench across it, right there. Realized, oh, there's that much stratified construction fills running across this whole end of the site. And if you look in profile, maybe you can see these. So there's I think there's 4 layers of construction fill. You can see this before you get down to this this buried A horizon, right? There's like, I can't even see it very well from back here. You clearly see 1, 2, 3, and there's a 4th in there somewhere. You can see some water laminations in the construction fill, like they're laying down earth, they're moving earth, and it's raining. And they're bringing the earth, mostly it looks like from the top of the hill, as if they're like leveling the top, and they're dragging this earth down the side, and they're stacking it up. Now, the interesting thing is, well, how often they're doing this. Is this all one event, or is it like, I don't know, each construction fill layer separated by a few years? I thought the latter, in part because we have some wall trench houses that are down here, and we have some wall trench houses that are on this layer, and then we clearly have some that are coming in from the top. Although Jeannie, looking at those micromorphology samples, says there's like no weathering on these surfaces. So I'm at the moment a little confused. Whatever time is passing between each of these layers isn't much. And also keep in mind that this is the plow zone. The plow zone base is here. Plow top is higher. This is eroded for 150 years. There would have been like another meter or so of fill above this. So the site is really complicated. In ways it just makes it truly difficult to sort out, what's going on where. To help sort that out, we kind of go to an easier part of the site. So the easier part of the site that shows you a little snapshot, more than this kind of palimpsest, is EB1. Way off to the side of the site, where we had found a lot of arrowheads on the surface. Thought, why don't we dig here, see what's here? And what's there is a shorter term series of political religious buildings. Some rebuilding, like this one. But otherwise, not too much superpositioning, with one shrine house, one yellow floor building in the mix, and then a couple of sweat lodges. I suspect these buildings were standing for 50 years maybe, and there's perhaps one priest or one family group of caretakers taking care of all of them, because really there's not many artifacts down in this area. Now, there's a couple of interesting things to mention. One, these shrine houses, I think they're special. There's every reason to think that the ancient folks thought they were special at Pfeffer and here, and this is one. Clearly, some Indians went back in sometime after that was abandoned and redug into their own shrine house. So this little rectangular hole there is a post-abandonment feature. It's dug down to the floor, as is this pit, which is dug into this house, and this other pit, which is dug into that sweat lodge. And there's that shrine house. You can see that rectangular re-excavation, right? You can't see the pit. The pit that was up here that dug back into this was even more interesting because it had a broken early Sterling phase jar in it, and then a little Patrick phase jar. They broke it and put it in, pretty much whole. Seemingly, a curated ancient pot that was put in the early Sterling phase, over the top of this special house. It now looks like, and this was going to be someone's dissertation, not yours, but another person's dissertation. Like, it looks like this whole building complex was decommissioned at one point because we have water deposits that close up most of those central buildings. That is water-washed silts. That shrine house, and this big council house, which looks to be the last one standing out there, including into the central post pit. And the central post pit, there it is. And if you could see it more clearly, you'd see this is a water wash layer right down about halfway down this post pit. And this is where we found a petite young adult. Buried classic kind of Cahokia fashion, right? Flex position in this post pit. I would guess it's probably a young female. And here's Sarah and Susan trying to figure out how to deal with the second half of this. Where, again, you can sort of see that this is water-washed silt. Basically, this body was immersed in water and covered over with water-washed silt. All at this closing, seemingly at this one moment where the whole complex is shut down and then she's put in some kind of offering. There are big patterns here that I'm not talking about much. These buildings, kind of like the site itself and the locality, are generally aligned to celestial events. And you can, if nothing else, see that it's a non-random. There's clusters of buildings in certain alignments that I'm not going to talk about. There's also some emerging evidence that I haven't gotten back to because that involves Bayesian analysis of AMS states, and we just got another batch in. There's a hint in that Bayesian analysis of those pulses that I mentioned earlier. That things are, it's like it's not a range that is continuous. It's clustered that may correspond to specific kind of astronomical events, right, that I'm trying to highlight here as we go across. So maybe, for instance, those water wash fills and that human offering were a part of some other bigger, cosmic kind of event. It's what you do when you go to the Emerald site. Now, if I can develop this side of the story better, then this kind of becomes kind of interesting. So if you look at more of a climatic model of the rise and fall of Cahokia, where Emerald starts back here, and Emerald, and the human offering in the pit of the decommissioned part of the site dates to about here. It's like, so maybe Emerald is a place where some of the events happening in Emerald may be climate related, in addition to being, like astronomically related. At least the potential is there to try to pull apart, like what's going on, when are people coming here, how does that correlate to the big changes in the region? That's my hope anyway. You can ask me about that.
Tim, what's PDSI?
PDSI is the Palmer Drought Severity Index. So that's the extrapolation based on looking at cypress and cedar tree rings from all across the mid-continent and projecting those across the parts of the continent we don't know anything about, the amount of water in the system. So these are periods of not enough water, more or less. This plenty of water, and then in more droughty conditions as you move this way. So 1100 is a pretty bad downturn overall for a series of years. It gets worse. After it gets a little better, it gets worse again. Palisade walls going up here. So the possibility, if you really over-interpret this graph, is like the earliest shrine buildings at Emerald are when there's not enough water. So these shrine houses could be out there, so people praying for the right amount of water for their corn. Then everything's fine, and then there's a problem again, and that's when we have this closure event of that one part of the site. I'll keep it simple. The worst problem right now is, so the last year we were out there, the other farmer decided he was going to start terracing his side too. So that excavation area I showed you with the trench that ran through it, that's it. So the farmer went in and bulldozed it after we had finished our one season of excavation, and then bulldozed this nice new terrace to the side, and he's dug more terracing down slope. So the whole side's continuing to be degraded, and quite actively so, because they keep plowing up and down the slope even though they put these terraces in. That's it.